Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're taking what could just be a dry, standard English textbook chapter and, well, transforming it into a masterclass on communication. We're going on a bit of a journey, starting from the absolute rigid rules of grammar and ending up in the deeply emotional art of storytelling. We're going to see how mastering the absolute micromechanics of language, like literally just how you build a single sentence, can actually empower you to handle real-world crises, break down literature, and tell incredibly powerful stories. So let's dive right in. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. Mastering sentence transformations, the perfect apology letter, writing critical compositions, analyzing a classic tale, and finally, the final grammar test. All right, Section 1, Mastering Sentence Transformations, the actual building blocks. So this is the micro level of language, and it's absolutely crucial. Before we even think about transforming sentences, we've got to understand our core tools. Think of a sentence kind of like a piece of architecture. Your principal clause, that's your solid foundation. It's an independent thought that can stand completely on its own 2 feet and make perfect sense. Now, the subordinate clause, that's like a beautiful custom extension to the house. It's a dependent thought, it adds depth, context, and a lot of color, but it definitely can't stand on its own. Playing around with just these 2 elements, that's what gives you total control over the rhythm of your writing. Just look at how we can use these clauses to completely shift the emotional weight of a sentence. Over on the left, we've got, in spite of his wealth, he is not happy. It's a simple sentence, right? Gets the job done. But look on the right. We convert that phrase into a subordinate clause to make it complex. However wealthy he may be, he is not happy. Do you feel the difference there? That subtle shift adds this undeniable dramatic flair. It builds up this anticipation right before delivering the final, slightly tragic point. You're literally saying the exact same thing, but you are guiding the reader's emotions in a totally different way. Now, this next one brilliantly illustrates the exact opposite effect. Because, sometimes you don't actually want dramatic flair. You just want a direct, punchy impact. On the left, we have a compound sentence. The boy was disobedient, so the teacher punished him. It's a little wordy, isn't it? It kind of feels like 2 separate events just casually linked together. But by converting it to the simple sentence on the right, the teacher punished the boy for disobedience. We create a much more direct, concise, and frankly, authoritative statement. Mastering these little transformations means you're always choosing the exact right tool for the job. Moving on to Section 2, the perfect apology letter. This is all about highly functional communication. Let's zoom out a bit and see how these foundational sentences actually build real-world documents. To really grasp the weight of written correspondence, our source text highlights this wonderful quote from W.H. Auden's poem, Night Mail. He writes about letters of thanks, letters from banks, and gossip from all the nations. I mean, it sets the stage beautifully, doesn't it? Letters aren't just cold information transfers. They have a profound, highly personal impact on whoever is receiving them. They carry joy, fear, business, and, well, in our next case, regret. So the crucial thing here is applying this to a high-stakes, real-world scenario. Imagine for a second you're the assistant manager at a furniture store. A really angry customer calls you up. They ordered this dining room set 10 weeks ago, and it never showed up. You do some digging and find out the table was damaged in transit between the factory and the warehouse. And to make matters worse, because it always rains when it pours, due to some staff illness, nobody ever wrote to the customer to explain the delay. You are now tasked with writing a letter that regains their goodwill, but without sounding overly defensive or just throwing out empty excuses. So, how exactly do you pull that off? You do it by relying on a highly structured 4-paragraph plan. Check out this architecture. Paragraph 1. You reference the specific source of the complaint and offer a simple apology. This immediately shows you're actually listening. Paragraph 2. You offer a credible explanation. Notice I said credible. You don't make excuses, you literally just state the facts. The item was damaged in transit, and a clerical illness led to the oversight. Simple. Paragraph 3. This is the action phase where you state what you're doing to set things right, like, say, waiving a 900 rupee delivery charge and immediately sending a replacement. And finally, paragraph 4, a solid conclusion and a formal, repeated apology. It is this perfect, delicate blend of taking full responsibility while actively offering solutions. All right, Section 3, writing critical compositions. Let's talk about analyzing art. Look, when you're asked to review a book, a play, or a film, you can't just throw your hands up and say, hey, I liked it. You need structure. The source material we're looking at outlines 6 essential components for a critical composition. You kick things off with an introduction to set the background. Then, you briefly touch on plot and theme, but you aren't just summarizing here. You're asking what point the author is actually trying to make. Next up is characterization. Are the characters convincing or maybe a bit cynical? Then you look at style and presentation, followed by the purpose or audience, like is this an escapist novel or a deep philosophical text? And finally, you wrap it up with your personal comments, where you justify your own opinion with really solid reasons. Now, to absolutely nail that style and presentation section, our source challenges us to pose some essential questions as critics. You've got to ask things like, is the work fast-moving and exciting, or is it bitter and ironic? What makes it recognizably the work of the specific person who made it? It's these kinds of probing questions that take your writing from just a simple, boring summary to a truly insightful piece of criticism. Which brings us to Section 4, Analyzing a Classic Tale, the story of the Tuvaches and the Valens. Let's actually put those critical analysis skills to the test right now. We're looking at the source material for an incredibly intense moral dilemma. Basically, a very wealthy woman, Madame Hangrid, arrives at the modest cottage of a family called the Tuvaches, and she offers to essentially adopt their young son, Charlotte. The offer is just staggering. 20,000 francs deposited immediately in the boy's name, plus a pension of 100 francs every single month for the parents until they die. It is an absolute fortune, but it requires them giving up their child completely. Let's trace the narrative arc here to see exactly how the author structures this tension. First, we get the offer. The Tuvaches react with just absolute indignation. The mother practically screams, "You want me to sell you Charlotte? Oh no." So Madame Henri just turns around and goes right next door to their neighbors, the Vallimans, who happen to have a son named John. The Vallimans? Well, they accept the money and give up their son. Fast forward 20 whole years. These two families have lived side by side this entire time. One is miserably poor, but they kept their son, while the other is living very comfortably on that pension, but without theirs. And notice the absolutely devastating outcome here. 20 years later, a young gentleman wearing a gold watch and chain pulls up in a fancy carriage. It's John Valin. He's returning to his biological parents as this wealthy, highly educated man. Meanwhile, Charlotte, the Tuvache boy whose parents chose to keep him, is watching this whole reunion from his doorway. Now, despite his parents choosing love and loyalty over a literal fortune, Charlotte turns to them at supper and just brutally rebukes them. He looks at them and says, "I reproach you for having been such fools. Parents like you make the misfortune of their children." Wow. I mean, it's a bitter, deeply ironic ending, and it perfectly fits that critical framework we were just talking about. The author isn't just telling us a story here, they're forcing us to grapple with a deeply, deeply uncomfortable question. Would you give up your child for a fortune? The Tuvaches totally thought they were taking the moral high ground, and yet they end up being punished by their own son's resentment. The Valens literally sold their child, but they end up reaping all this comfort and a joyful reunion. It is just a masterful use of plot and characterization to explore the agonizing complexities of human nature. Okay. Section 5, the final grammar test. Let's put everything into practice. So we've explored these grand narratives and heavy emotional dilemmas. But remember, a great communicator has got to maintain a firm grip on the micromechanics. Let's see how sharp your skills are with a quick challenge. You need to synthesize two ideas here. Join these two simple sentences into one complete sentence. But here's the catch. You are not allowed to use the words and, but, or so. The sentences are, Milton was a great poet, and he wrote the epic poem, Paradise Lost. Think about how you could restructure this for maximum elegance. Got it? Here's the correct answer. Milton, a great poet, wrote the epic poem Paradise Lost. This brilliantly illustrates a really cool grammatical tool called apposition. By taking a great poet and turning it into a descriptive phrase set off by commas, we seamlessly combine two kind of clunky thoughts into one elegant flowing sentence. It's just a tiny mechanical trick, but it instantly elevates your writing style. All right, let's try just one more. This one's going to test your precision with prepositions, which, as we know, can completely alter the entire meaning of a phrase. Fill in the blank for this sentence. A miser does not want to part blank his money. Take a second. What is the exact word required right there? The correct answer is with. A miser does not want to part with his money. Now that might seem like a super small detail, but using the wrong preposition can make a sentence sound incredibly unnatural or change its meaning entirely. Having precision at this micro level, that's what actually builds trust with your reader, whether you're firing off a simple email or writing a sweeping literary novel. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative thought. How do the micromechanics of language actually shape the reality of the stories we tell? As we've seen throughout this explainer, the rigid rules of grammar aren't just dry, boring textbook exercises. They are the literal tools we use to navigate tricky apologies, analyze incredibly complex art, and express the deepest ironies of the human condition. When you master the structure of a single sentence, you're mastering the very foundation of powerful, persuasive storytelling. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the architecture of language. Keep analyzing, keep writing, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.